the idea of walking around Vienna, listening to all these, operas and stuff. I wonder, now that you're back in India, you've been living here for quite a while now. Was it like weird to come back to India and realize कि अरे ये तो सारे ऐसे ही हैं और मेरा seasoned cultured self अब थोड़ा अलग से अपने आप को ढालना पड़ेगा? Did you have to sacrifice certain parts of the identities that you picked on when you were abroad? Picked
No,
up when you were abroad?
no, not really. You find your own space. And that's a good thing about Delhi, is that Delhi gets a whole cross section of people. The second thing is I travel a lot. This year has been horrible because of COVID. I haven't been able to travel.
Right.
But I usually, in a year, I'd spend about 3-4 months abroad. Usually there's the mandatory holiday, summer holiday in Italy, जहाँ मैं बीच में जाके tanning करते हैं क्योंकि मैं इतने गोरे हैं, मेरा blonde hair और blue eyes थोड़ा odd लगता है, तो मुझे जाके सूरज में बैठती हैं और वो काले हो जाते हैं पूरे तो अच्छा लगते हैं मेरे को. But I travel a lot for work. And I get my culture fixes there because I've got friends in virtually every city in Europe. Friends that I love hanging out with and who love hanging out with me. So I will just go plonk there and do whatever. Even now, for opera season, I land up in Vienna almost every year. So, I don't miss my life in that sense. It's perfectly intact. I get what I want when I want it.
That's quite an admirable thing to say. In fact, अभी मैं podcast record कर रहे हैं. My goal by the middle of this year is to get to Spain. I have books around learning Spanish because I have inklings of an idea of living a life, something like yours, where I'm able to manage my affairs here in India. Show cause whenever I have to, but then have those. I had a professor once in college. She was a professor of Middle Eastern history, and she would talk about, spending her New Year's in Beirut. And then, having lovers in Casablanca. तो मेरे को idea बड़ा far लगा. मैंने कहा if I could have multiple lives in other countries, how awesome would that be?
But see, that's the beauty of it. I think you learn every trip that I go abroad. People think I'm just traveling for the sake of traveling. I'm not. When you travel, you learn so much. You meet new people. You have new experiences. It constantly enriches you. When I was a kid, for example, my uncle was posted in Baghdad. And this was when Saddam Hussein was in power in the 84, 85, 86, or one of those years, I forget now. So I landed up in Baghdad. And, I used to keep going to the Iraq Museum, which, after the invasion was looted, there's nothing left there now. But my fondest memories there are of going to the Iraq Museum. And at school, I wanted to present a paper on the status of women in pre-Islamic local, the condition of women in local areas before Islam came.
Right.
It was fascinating because, first of all the curators at the museum, they were like really enthused by this kid who used to get dropped off every morning in the museum, was coming to the museum every single day to admire everything. And they're like, yaar, ye 7 saal ka bachcha humko bahut pyara lagta hai. So they used to, like I told you, I had this knack of picking up friends who were 30, 40 years old when I was 7, 8 years old. So I used to go sit with them, talk to them about these things. They decipher all these cuneiform scripts for me. These letters, supposedly, where I think they might have been destroyed, from the prophet to Khusro Anushirvan, the Sassanid emperor. Because remember, Iraq was Persia at that point of time.
Right.
The capital was in Tisfun, which was the capital for most of medieval Persia was in Tisfun, which is in the outskirts of Baghdad.
What's the name you said?
Tisfun.
Tisfun.
Called Ctesiphon in Grecianized versions, but called Tisfun. Tisfun was Baghdad, effectively. So it was a really nice time, and I learned so much from them. That is what travel does to you. It enriches you. You learn new things. I mean, I've traveled often where I've learned nothing, but then I've traveled to places where you learn small things slowly, and you can aggregate them into your macro anthropological views or your social views and things like that. And this is what really upsets me about the Indian right. There was this Twitter campaign some 4 5 years back, better than the Taj Mahal.
Hmm.
How every Indian nook and cranny little temple or whatever, we only have temples realistically, was better than the Taj Mahal. I'm like, boss, you're comparing apples and oranges. Why does something have to be better than the other thing? And secondly, if you want to nail this down purely to technical details,
Hmm.
Indian temples are not architecture, they are sculpture.
Hmm.
Okay. Uh, they're a piling up of rocks with sculptural elements. There is very little in terms of architecture involved. And my worry is because these people have not traveled, they don't get what they're talking about. So there was one idiot called Ugra Narasimha or something like that. I forget his name. He was talking about how this fat, bald, gay idiot keeps saying, Tanjore Temple is not particularly great. Look at the size of the Tanjore Temple, la di da di da. At the same time, in fact, 100 years before the Tanjore Temple was being built, you had these great cathedrals in Germany being built by the Holy Roman Empire,
Hmm.
starting from 900 till about 1000 or so. They're called the Kaiser domes. So you look at the Kaiser Dome of Speyer or any of them, they are so huge. The Tanjore Temple is essentially इधर एक छोटा सा sanctum sanctorum है और उसके ऊपर इतना सारा stone है.
Hmm.
Here, if you go to the Cathedral of Speyer, it is so big that the internal volume itself can contain the entire Tanjore Temple within it.
That's crazy.
That is called architecture. Right? It does require a lot of skill that for a small sanctum sanctorum here to be able to hold so much stone above it. If you look at the evolution of pyramids, for example, the first pyramid is the step pyramid, which was steps, Dzoser's pyramid. It wasn't very this thing because जो vacuum था, जो space था ऊपर, it was almost near the top. Because what happens is the weight of stones becomes so much that it crushes the stone at the bottom. So, building something that high is an architectural feat. Then you had the bent pyramid. The bent pyramid is because the burial chamber was somewhere in the middle. And they couldn't, after you make that hole, it becomes impossible to pile on more stones above that because it crushes that chamber onto itself. So they bent the pyramid to reduce the weight of stones above the burial chamber. Finally, you have the Cheops, the Giza pyramids, which attain the full pyramidal structure. So in that sense, Tanjore is important because it managed to pile so much granite, which is much heavier than sandstone, onto a small sanctum sanctorum is interesting. But it is nothing compared to an architectural feat where you can create so much internal volume. I mean, in sheer engineering terms, this is a far greater feat. I mean, you are achieving in 1000 AD what the Egyptians had managed to achieve in 2500 BC. When Julius Caesar saw the pyramids, he was closer to our time than to the time when the pyramids were built. When Julius Caesar saw the pyramids, 2500 years had passed. When we see Julius Caesar, only 2000 years had passed. That is the kind of antiquity you're talking about. It takes a particularly narrow, close-minded idiot to think that India was better at everything, was the mother of everything and the grandmother of everything.